Hi there. Today we read chapter 14 of Enid Blyton's The Land Far Beyond. In the last chapter, the travelers got off the path again and finally managed to find it with a little help from common sense. So, have they learned their lesson? We hope so. But before we continue, if you have not watched the previous chapters, please do so before continuing. Welcome to my space of make-believe. With just words we shall weave places and people, adventures surreal. I am Tell a Story. This is an invitation to come with me. Chapter 14. The thunderstorm over the plains of weariness, the coming of dismay and despair. Patience walks alone, the castle of desolation and the cellars of gloom. Patience finds cheerful comfort and courage. They go to rescue the prisoners. Now, said Mr. Scornful, when the six of them had said goodbye to common sense and were once again walking safely on the narrow path. Now, we don't leave this path again at all, not for anything or anyone. Well, Mr. Scornful, we didn't want to leave this morning, but you went on and on with Talkative and Bragg and the others, without hearing us shout to you, said Peter. We'll really be careful now. We ought to be getting near the land of far beyond soon, if only we keep safely on our way. That made everyone feel cheerful. Anna and Patience began to sing. Mr. Scornful and the boys whistled in tune. Everyone felt good-natured, ready to help the others along. My shoes and socks are dry already, said Peter, and he sat down to put them on. The others put theirs on too. The sun had soon dried the wet things. But the sun, alas, deserted the travellers soon after that. A big black cloud blew up from the west, and another, and then another. Soon the whole sky was overcast, and the clouds hung lower and lower. There's going to be a storm, said Anna, half afraid. Oh dear, how unfortunate we are. We always seem to be running into something unpleasant. The storm soon burst. There was a roll of thunder from the sky, and a flash of vivid lightning. Then great drops of rain fell and stung the travellers on their faces. Of course, we would be walking through a stretch of country where there isn't a tree or a hedge, said Mr. Scornful in an exasperated voice. There's absolutely nowhere to shelter at all. We shall get soaked. The path ran through a desolate stretch just there, with rough tussocks of grass sticking up and great rocks lying around. There was no bush, no hedge, no tree. The path ran winding around the big rocks, easy to see because it was narrow and well trodden. The rain poured down now. The drops were so big that Patience gasped as they struck her cheeks. She shook her wet hair and plodded on. The lightning flashed vividly, and the girls were all frightened. So were the boys, although they did not show it. Mr. Scornful was not afraid of a storm, but he was angry and dismayed at the soaking he was getting. They all plodded on. There was nothing else to do. They could not just sit down on the wet ground and wait for the storm to blow over. Anyway, it showed no signs of going at all. This is dreadful, said Anna in despair as she squeezed out her frock. I am soaked through. And look at me, said Peter in great dismay. There isn't a thread on me that isn't dripping wet, and now the wind is blowing terribly cold. We shall all get dreadful chills. Mr. Scornful sneezed so loudly that everyone jumped in alarm. I shall get one of my chills and be in bed for weeks, lamented Mr. Scornful. Then you'll all have to go on without me. The children felt dismayed to hear this. They were not fond of Mr. Scornful, but they had got used to him, and he was the only grown-up left to guide them on their way. Just then they heard the patter of footsteps behind them, and up came two people carrying huge umbrellas. Peter looked at them enviously. They were not very pleasant people to look at. Their faces were full of fear, and they kept looking all around them as if expecting something dreadful to happen. Good day, said the first man, whose name was Dismay. Have you got caught in this fearful storm? I and Despair always get caught in it when we cross the plain of weariness. Yes, it's a funny thing, but the sun always goes in over this plain, said Despair, his sad-looking eyes gazing mournfully at the travellers. It's such a miserable stretch of country. It could do with plenty of sun and warmth, but no, in goes the sun. Up come the clouds, down comes the rain, and in no time at all travellers are soaked to the skin. Let us come under your umbrella, said Anna, shivering, and she and Lily crept under the big umbrella that Despair held over his grey head. Mr. Scornful and the two boys went under Dismay's big umbrella, but Patience walked on in the rain, looking up every now and again to see if the sun was peeping behind a cloud. I'm so wet already that I can't get any wetter, she called. It wasn't very pleasant under the big black umbrellas of Despair and Dismay. To begin with, it was very, very dark under them, and although they certainly kept the rain off, it was difficult to see where they were going. Despair and Dismay kept their umbrellas well down in front, and the travellers could only hope that the two knew their way well enough to keep to the narrow path. I think the rain has stopped, said Mr. Scornful at last, and he stepped out from under the big dark umbrella. It had stopped. But what was this? They were no longer on the narrow path, but had once again wandered right away from it, hidden under the wide-spreading umbrellas of Despair and Dismay. "We're off the path again," cried Peter in alarm. "Oh, it's too bad. We'll never get to the land of far beyond at this rate." "You never will," said Despair in his miserable voice. "Hardly anyone ever does. It's danger all the way, and at the end, what's to be found? Nothing much, I can assure you." "We're going to get back to our path," said Mr. Scornful in a very resolute voice. "I don't know how I've been so silly as to allow myself to get off it again. Which is the way back, my man?" "I don't know," answered Despair, shading his eyes and looking all round. "But look, there's a castle not far off. Let's go to it and ask our way." "I'm not very fond of castles," said Mr. Scornful doubtfully. "Whose castle is that?" "I don't know," said Dismay. "We'd better go and find out. Anyway, you must get your clothes dried in front of a fire, or you'll all get chills, and then you won't be able to travel for weeks." Mr. Scornful sneezed loudly again. His throat felt sore. He began to be alarmed about himself. Suppose he fell ill on this journey? Who would look after him? This would never do. "We'll go to the castle and find out where we are," he said. And then, to everyone's surprise, he suddenly said, "Now, where in the world is Patience?" No one had missed her up to that moment. They had been so busy walking under the big umbrellas and looking at the big castle not far off that they hadn't noticed that Patience was not with them. "Goodness! She must have gone on by herself in the rain without us," said Peter in alarm. "We'd better go after her." "But we don't know where she has gone," said Anna, her eyes filling with tears. Everyone stared round in great dismay. It was dreadful to lose Patience suddenly like this. "Come on," said Despair, taking Mr. Scornful's arm in a firm grip. "Let's get into the castle before the next rainstorm. There's one coming. We can't be worse off than where we are now. Maybe your little friend will turn up soon." So they all went to the castle gates. The two enormous iron gates opened silently in front of them as they came near. It was rather strange. They all went in, and the gates shut silently behind them. They went up to a steep flight of steps to a great wooden door, studded with enormous blunt-headed nails. That too opened silently. Mr. Scornful and the children hung back, half afraid, but Despair and Dismay, suddenly strong, pushed them all inside, and the door shut behind them. And then their two mournful companions took everyone by the arm and hurried them down a long dark passage into miserable cellars. Down slimy steps they were pushed, and onto cold stone floors from which frogs hopped away by the dozen. "Where are you putting us?" cried Mr. Scornful, trying to force his way up the slimy steps. But Despair pushed him back and laughed a horrid laugh. "This is the castle of desolation, and we have put you into the cellars of gloom. Stay here for a year or two and let us hear your moans and sighs. Dismay and I love to hear those. They are sweet sounds in our ears." Then there came the sound of a key being turned into the lock, and the 5 travellers were prisoners in the horrid castle of desolation. Then indeed they felt lonely and desolate, sad and gloomy. How were they to escape? Where was Patience, and would they ever see her again? How they hated Dismay and Despair, the two treacherous companions who had taken them so easily from the path. If only little Patience doesn't get taken prisoner too by those horrid men, sobbed Anna. I do wonder where she is. She wouldn't come under our umbrellas, so I didn't see where she went. Patience was a long way away. She had plodded on in the rain, shaking the wet from her hair when it hung there in drops, trying to be cheerful. She had not at all liked the looks of Dismay and Despair, and didn't want to go near them, even for the sake of sharing their big umbrellas. No, she had thought, I'd rather plod on by myself. I can't get any wetter. I might as well be wearing a bathing suit. I'm so wet. After a while, Patience missed the sound of the feet and voices of the others, and she turned around to see where they were, and they were not there. She stood and stared in the utmost amazement. Well, where can they have gone? She wondered. And they said they weren't going to leave the path. But they must have, and they didn't tell me. Oh dear, what am I to do? She went back a little way, and then saw that footprints led off the path to the left. The little girl stood there, wondering whether or not to follow them. Nothing good ever happens when we leave the path, thought Patience. But I can't go on alone. Maybe I'll come to some house or other and can ask for help. So the little girl went plodding on down the path by herself, trying to keep cheerful and not to worry too much. She came to a stream that ran right across the path and splashed through it, hoping it would not get too deep. She came to a very rocky part, and had to climb patiently over masses of big rocks that seemed to have fallen from the hill nearby. It was hard and tiring work, but Patience set her teeth and determined not to give up. Soon she heard someone calling to her. She turned and saw a merry-faced woman. "Hello!" cried the woman, scrambling over the rocks to Patience. "Do you want any help? Who are you, all alone in this part of the country?" "My name is Patience," said the little girl, and she told the merry-faced woman how she had lost her companions. "Who are you? Will you help me?" "I am called Cheerful," said the woman, and she took Patience's hand. Things seemed much brighter suddenly. The rain stopped. The sun came out. Patience felt warmer, and she liked the feel of the woman's firm hand. "Come to my cottage for a few minutes and dry your clothes," said Cheerful. "My sister Comfort lives there, and she will help you." Patience trusted Cheerful and went willingly with her to a pretty little cottage set by the path. Indoors was another sweet-faced woman, the sister of Cheerful. Comfort took off the little girl's wet clothes and dressed her in a big old dressing gown, warm and cozy. She gave her hot milk to drink and ginger biscuits to nibble. She listened whilst Patience told her how she had lost the others. When the little girl described the two sad-faced, mournful men who had come with their big umbrellas, Comfort gave a cry. "Why, those were Dismay and Despair. They roam around the plains of Weariness and take as many travellers as they can to their castle of Desolation. They put them into the cellars of Gloom. Only people who are determined enough or patient enough can get safely through the plain without being taken off by those two horrid old men." "Well, my name is Patience, so maybe that is why I got through safely," said the little girl. "Of course," said Comfort, kissing her. "You must have been a good, patient little thing to come along all this way by yourself." "How can I help my brother and sister and the others?" asked Patience, drinking her hot milk. "I can't leave them locked up in the castle of Desolation. Can't we rescue them?" "Yes," said Cheerful. "Our cousin Courage will soon be here on his evening visit. He has managed to get hold of the keys of the castle doors, and often rescues the poor prisoners there if he hears of them. After you are dry and warm, we will go with you, and Courage shall take us to the castle." "Will Despair and Dismay fight us?" asked Patience, half afraid, but Cheerful shook her bright head. "They always run for the miles when they see Courage coming. Indeed, they would run away even if they saw you, Patience, and they can't bear either me or Comfort. Eat up your biscuits. Our cousin Courage will soon be here." Not long afterwards, there came the sound of a cheerful whistling, and into the little cottage came a stout, smiling youth, his eyes looking very straight at Patience. He was big and strong, and his mouth was determined. His cousins told him about Patience and her lost companions. "We are sure they must now be locked up in the cellars of gloom," said Comfort. Courage laughed and took some enormous keys from his pocket. He jangled them together and held them out to Patience. "My keys will open any cellar in the Castle of Desolation," he said in his determined voice. "Shall we go now? You must come with me, for you may be of help." The four set out, and after a while came to where the trail of footsteps left the path. The rain had begun again, and the four found it difficult to walk over the rough grass towards the big castle that loomed up out of the mist across the plain. They came to the enormous iron gates. Courage fitted one of his keys into the lock. He turned it, and the gates swung open. They went through and up the steep flight of steps. Another of Courage's keys fitted the lock of the nail-studded door, and that opened easily too. Inside the dark hall were Dismay and Despair, amazed at the unexpected visitors. "Run at them, Patience! Laugh at them, Cheerful and Comfort!" cried Courage. "I will be ready to strike them down if they show fight, but they are cowards at heart." He was right. Despair and Dismay gave a scream of alarm and fled away into the heart of their dark castle. Courage laughed a ringing laugh that echoed cheerfully down the long hall. "They can never face me," he said. "Now we will visit the cellars. I am sure your poor friends are there." His last key fitted the lock on the cellar doors, and down at the bottom of the steps were the 5 travellers, amazed to see the 4 at the top. "Patience!" cried Peter joyfully. "You've found us!" "I've brought Courage along with his great keys to unlock the doors and the gates," said Patience, hugging Anna and Peter as they came scrambling up the steps. "Hurry out now. I found a lovely cottage where you can dry your clothes and rest a while. It belongs to Comfort and her sister Cheerful." So in great delight, the 5 rescued travellers followed Courage back to the cottage, shivering with cold and wet, but warm at heart to think of brave little Patience and all the trouble she had gone to save them from the Castle of Desolation and their 2 horrible captives, Dismay and Despair. The end of chapter 14. And again they lost their way, and again they find people who've helped them. I guess it's who you listen to more, right? It's just like those barking dogs. Which one do you pay attention to? Which one do you feed? The positive or the negative? Well, if you would like to read this book, search it up online as it is in the public domain. Otherwise, please join me in the next chapter. I would love to have you for company. Till the next time, go grab yourself a book, read, and let your imagination take you anywhere. Be anyone and do anything. And do share your reads in the comments. Would love to know. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.